when I was working in a big organization, I always used to say organizations don't do things, people do. It's all about the people and, right? It's all
Yeah.
about and you got to treat them as gold and high expectations, but you got to work with people, right? You can't just sit over an organization and hope it works.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am thrilled to have a special former tech executive, and it's really an honor, as I said, to have you here, Scott, to talk about some things that small businesses and entrepreneurs need to be aware of in this day and age of tech and AI.
Well, it's great to be with you, Nika. Thank you.
Of course. Let's talk about your background a little bit. You and I've had a few conversations, but I always want to hear, because I find so many people who have great corporate careers and then decide to maneuver to something else, whether that is, being an analyst, being an advisor, starting their own company. And a lot of our listeners are in that space. And the other ones are people who may be embracing AI, maybe a little hesitant. And so they need to understand what the ecosystem looks like today.
Right. Well, boy, we got to go back a long way. Unfortunately, well, I guess there's good news and there's bad news in this, right? I start off with when I joined IBM over 3 decades ago, I had a degree in computer systems engineering. And I realized at the time that that's really hard stuff. So I ended up going into IBM and I did a lot of relationship management with software vendors. I got into the software group. When it was all said and done, I ended up with I think 20 plus, maybe 23 years of executive management across pretty much all the business units in IBM at one time or the other, maybe 1 or 2 missing out of dozens. So I had a broad set of experiences across hardware, software, and tech services and working through the ecosystem of business partners. And, the vast majority of it was in the software area, which I think is really key. I also was lucky enough to be able to do positions such as product management. I did tech strategy, and I was the CMO of several of the big businesses at IBM, including before I ended up leaving the IBM's AI, data and AI business, where Watson X is. And so that's what got me into AI. So about 7 years ago. And I just felt, the time came where it was just time to do something different and build on my experience. We talked once and I mentioned that it's kind of like seeing the same movie over and over again with different characters in terms of these technological transformations. I think we're in the 3rd big one that's underway now, which most people, and I agree, is this is going to be the biggest change yet when it comes to the effect, not just on society, but the business landscape. I think this AI stuff is for real. It's very much in its infancy. And so I thought it was just time to go and really focus on that. And so, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of advisors for several AI startups, and I'm now an analyst for AI, doing a lot of research about what's going on and engaging with dozens and dozens of businesses across the globe.
Yeah. Fantastic. There's so many ways we can go with this conversation. One is, of course, artificial intelligence has been around since the 50s. What happened in the last few years, since your engagement with AI, to see it move into really being something that everybody has access to, at least generative AI solutions?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the concept and some of the capabilities of AI go back decades. I would say it's been about maybe a little bit less than a decade in terms of its real starting point in business. And if you kind of look over up to 2022 or so, it was largely what we would call predictive AI kind of solutions. So they were AI models, probably immature models, but they were still AI models that were designed to predict an outcome, identify patterns or anomalies. And then that would allow people, if you understood how the past operated, right, through the AI model, you could then project what may happen next in the future, right? So it was like crunching massive, statistical probabilities across very large data sets. And it would basically tell you the what, right? Now, was it accurate? All that stuff, it's another whole conversation, but that's what it was used for, right? So, perhaps predicting where an individual stock may go based on its history, or predicting what the inventory should be like given different weather conditions in different times of year during, if you were a store, right? Things of that nature, predict the what, basically. When 2022 came with the advent of generative AI, when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, that changed everything because that democratized it beyond just data scientists and engineers and all that stuff that had to build all this stuff. Now, all of us experience generative AI. So it added that interactive experience where you can prompt it and ask it questions. And it's just some absolutely incredible technology. And I think the implicit ROI, return on investment, that businesses are getting is quite profound. It's there, right? Maybe not explicit. I think a lot of it has to do with personal productivity. It's making everyone that's using it more productive, no matter what they're doing. But it's still anchored on the premise that what it can tell you and what it can figure out for you is based on what happened in the past, not necessarily what may happen in the future. And it's still, let's just call it a static world. And I think where this is all going to head is it's going to start to not only be able to predict future outcomes based on what has happened in the past, but it's going to understand the future. It's going to allow you to intervene with it and do what if scenarios, play with counterfactuals. It's going to actually allow you to understand how probabilities change when the world around you changes. You know, the dynamic nature of a business and the dynamic nature of consumers and society and all that stuff. And it's going to allow you not to only understand the what may happen, but how it knows that, how you should go about achieving what you want to achieve, and why out of all these different options and actions you can take, these are the best ones. So it's going to add the how and the why to the what.
Yeah.
And that's where this stuff is going to get really, really interesting, I think. And this is like, I'm talking the next couple of years here for sure.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty quick timeline when a lot of people are still, I think I might have told you I'm on the Intuit Small Business Council. And so last year, I should say, we went because it was post-pandemic. And so we talked to Congress about, the digital divide and how businesses had to jump onto internet. A lot of mom and pops, a lot of the small business ecosystem didn't have robust websites, weren't equipped to take sales via online, weren't necessarily using Zoom and these other tools during the pandemic. So now we've seen this shift to get them digitized at a rate probably 7 years faster than what was the algorithm had said they needed to be on or that we had anticipated. And then this year we went and spoke about AI powers Main Street. And of course, Intuit uses a lot of AI data to see if somebody's a good credit risk, if somebody should get a loan, how else they want to interact with a customer or client, which goes to the predictive analysis that you were talking about. I've heard that the stock market and things, a lot of financial systems are pretty much run by AI at this point with a little bit of human intervention here and there. And then we come to today where we have people who are still not fully utilizing it, who need to at least understand even the basics, right? And so I'm wondering what the starting point needs to be. Of course, ChatGPT, Claude Sonnet, a lot of things like that.
Yep. I think generative AI is the thing to focus on, right? Because that starts to suck up underneath the covers the predictive AI stuff. And I think the best way to think about this is I think generative AI is going to be a critical component of whatever happens going forward. And it's going to continue to mature. And the innovation cycles are just speeding up. You can see this happening in the marketplace, right? The investment that's going into some of these businesses is just unbelievable. It's outpacing anything that has happened in the past in terms of technology. And it's just going to, again, it's in its infancy. So it's really going to become more and more robust. You're just beginning to see what's possible here. And the trick's going to be for the technology businesses to democratize it all for everyone else. And that's what I think you're starting to happen. So if I was just to make what I was saying before a little bit more explicit through it, and let me give you two examples. We can all go out now and we can use Chat GPT, right? And I think we know what we can do with it, right? We can ask it to merge two tables and tell us the difference. It can ask us to summarize an article. It can help. We can ask it to create content. We can ask it what day of the week was it in 1932 on a Wednesday, and it will just instantly tell you, right? Because it has all that knowledge and memory, and it's able to, through its instincts, to tell you an answer. But you know what you're asking it. If you ever try to go out to ChatGPT or any of these, Copilot or Anthropic or any of these things, and ask it a more goal-oriented question, it's a little bit more nebulous, not an explicit task-oriented statement, the likelihood of it getting it right is not there. because it needs to, it can't really comprehend what you're asking it. It's taking what you ask it, then it's crunching through its memory. Where do I see that pattern before? Then it's doing transformations on that, and they can figure out what may happen, but it's all based on past information. But it's not very good at helping you make decisions, problem solve, or, how do I go about achieving a goal, right? And you can just play with that yourself, right? Today, and just, you'll see the more vague you get in the question, that's not really a task-oriented question, but more goal-oriented or problem-solving, the more it's going to struggle. In business, if you had a large language model and generative AI, and you've been, it's been feeding off all your data, let's say you're operating, let's just say 25 stores in a particular, set of cities across the United States, just for example. If you were to ask it, well, I see my revenue and profit going down slowly but surely. Why is that? It can crunch the numbers. It can tell you, well, people are waiting too long in line to get out of the store. And that's the problem, is that people are getting frustrated that you're not able to get in and out of the store fast enough. And it can say the way you fix that is by putting more people in the store on the front lines, right, at the cash registers and things of that nature. So that's great. It can tell you what. But then as soon as you could circle back and say, okay, so how many people should I put in what store to optimize my revenue? That's a goal. That's a problem solving. I'm trying to make a decision. That's where it's really going to struggle. With the advancements that are starting to emerge now, we call it causal AI. It's about cause and effect, which today's AI doesn't really understand. It will then be to tell you, well, you should put 3 people in this store and 4 in that store, and you should put them here and you should put them there, and this is how much it's going to cost. And it figures out this is the best option for you to optimize your revenue by distributing. If you can hire another 28 people, here's where you should put them. And then you can say, well, I don't really like that. What if I did this? I put 5 here instead of 2, and I did this and I did that. And then it'll say, okay, well, here's the delta. And you can actually start to, because everything in life is causal. Humans are causal. The way you think, reason, plan, make decisions, everything, you're weighing consequences. It's cause and effect, right? AI is going to be able to start to understand that. And that's where it's going to get really powerful. And if you've heard the term AI chatbot or AI agent, think of those as being, AI assistant or AI chatbot. Those are task-oriented. I'm prompting to do something for me, a task. All this new stuff that I'm referring to here is what you'll hear called an AI agent or agentic AI. I think it's going to become the thing of 2025. 2025 will be the rise of the AI agents.
Okay.
What differentiates them is the agents are goal-oriented and are going to start to help you problem solve and make decisions, not just execute a task, sort of like the example I just gave with the store, right? And that's where I think implicit ROI turns into hardcore return on investment for businesses. And it's up to these vendors to democratize this really super complex stuff under the covers to make it easy for, like you and I to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's going to be amazing. I'm all for that. Some of the things that I use, some of the tools that I use recently or in the past maybe 6 months that I've been playing with. One is a program that does a full analysis based on either a short summary that you put in of your brand, product, or service, or your website. And it pulls together, here's key insights for your company, here's some of your competitive set, here's some, your unique selling proposition, here are some potential customer personas, pain points, how you can speak to those pain points. It'll even create a whole funnel strategy, top, middle, and bottom of the funnel marketing strategy for what kind of content you should be putting out in your social media and KPIs. And it's really robust and fantastic, but it's a very small company. And so I worry that the smaller businesses that are coming out of creative minds who don't have the big financing are maybe going to fall behind. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this capability will show up in the applications that they're using, sort of what you just referenced. And that example, I think, is what I refer to as the implicit ROI, right? If you were to go off and try to do that by yourself, it would take you forever. You're able to now do it in probably a couple of hours or a day, just if you play around with it and all that. I mean, it's the productivity, but it's hard to measure once you do something with what you learned, it's hard to measure what the return on the investment was. If you were in the finance department, which runs a lot of companies, right? It's all money in, money out kind of concept. That's where I think it's going to start to change a little bit, right? Because you're going to more and more of the information that's going to get used will be internal or proprietary to a business. So what these chat GPT things are doing is they're sucking up all the information across the open internet, and that's what's making it smart. Imagine when they start to suck up the information that's within a business, whether it's a small business or a very large business. Businesses have more data than by magnitudes than there is out on the internet. And that's when it starts to understand the unique dynamics of your business, even if you're a small business, right? And that can then take that information about the web, everything you just kind of explained, and actually put some reasoning behind it through this notion of an AI agent that can understand a goal and help you with decision, problem solving, all that stuff. And I think it's that mix of things that's going to make this shift into another era of just significant change in ROI. But you can measure that, because you can measure, is my customer churn down? Am I getting more web traffic, right? Can I, what's the effect on my profit margins, the revenue growth? I mean, you'll be able to, link all that stuff together. The bigger companies are able to invest in their own data scientists, their AI engineers, and they are, right? They're investing significant amounts of money to build their own stuff, because every business is different. You can't just rely on information on the internet, right? Smaller businesses, I think, are going to get this capability increasingly through their application vendors and the people that they help to have services and stuff like that. So like if it's Salesforce or, any of these vendors, even small ones, you're starting to see them incorporate Gen AI into their applications, right? That you would buy and just use, including, Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint. I mean, right? With the Copilot being integrated, you're starting to see that happen now. And then those are just going to, progress into those are AI assistants. They'll progress into this notion of the agents I was talking about and just give you more and more capability without you as a small business or medium-sized business having to do as much technical work.
Mm-hmm.
This, I think we all know this, just if you even read a little bit about today's generative AI, but when you're talking trillions of tokens and hundreds of billions of parameters and sometimes even, a trillion parameters, these are huge, massive models, right? No one's ever going to be able to build all this stuff, right? But you don't need those huge numbers if you're doing it for your business, depending on the size of your data. And if you're starting to infuse knowledge of how you work, tacit knowledge, and you understand how your business operates and it learns through cause and effect, the amount of data you need will shrink to just the necessary data. But still, it's so unbelievably complicated that it's up to these vendors, this whole community of tech vendors, that all this hundreds of billions of dollars is being invested in. We see it every day, right? The hope is that they're going to democratize it for everybody through the applications. So it's coming. It's just a question, are we talking a couple of years here? Are we talking 5 years? I mean, I think just it's going to change everything we do a lot.
Well, in light of, we're recording this right after an election in the United States. And up to this point, there's been an executive order for AI nationally, but then it's been state by state. I've read recently about even Facebook or Meta. We can't really opt out of them training their AI model on our data and everything we're inputting into their systems, unless you live in Brazil or Europe, because of their privacy restrictions. So I'm just wondering if you think that the new administration is going to change anything about the way that AI is able to, continue growing in our use cases, because, there's concerns about ethics, whether it's how AI is labeled or, how it's utilized, what information are we using? We've heard about issues with trademarks and copyrights and people's images being used. So do you think that that'll have any bearing on the way that U.S. businesses can rely on and utilize AI, or not really?
Yeah, no, I think there actually will be a lot of change. I mean, I think there's at least a couple dimensions here to think through this with, right? One is there is the risk of not having a lot of regulations, because there is potential to do bad things with it, or bad things to happen even if it wasn't intentional, because they are prone to what we call hallucinations and bias and all that kind of stuff. But what comes with that is a restriction on innovation, right? On the other end is you can be more open with it, right? Have fewer regulations. That's going to open up the innovation, but then you're taking the risk of bad things happening, right? So I think that has to be calibrated a little bit better. And at least in the United States, different states have different takes on this, right? Some are much more restrictive than others, some are more open. So that's one dimension everyone has to think through. The other is pure investment to win
Okay.
in the global economy. And if you look at the investment that's going on in other countries like China and some of the other ones, it is massive. And I think that's one thing that for sure the spigot will be opened with the new administration, because I think they want to win the technology, compete to win the technology battles of the future. And the same could be said of Bitcoin, right? And digital currency and, energy. And you can kind of see there's just a different philosophy here, not to be overly restrictive and overly paranoid, but to open things up more for venture capital to flow into the United States so we can be the innovating force around AI and some of these other, digital technologies. And let's hope that what's going to happen here, there'll be a balanced thought here on the pendulum of free for all, risk of bad things. Too restrictive is going to slow everything down and make it too expensive, and therefore slow innovation. And let's hope that there's a lot of people that are brought in the government level, both federal and at the states, that really do understand AI business. Like Elon Musk, just as an example. I know he's popular to some and not popular to others, but you can't argue that he doesn't understand AI, right?
Right.
And I think of anyone that has to deal with more regulations than any person on the planet, given all the crazy things he's done, like the rockets and all that stuff, he certainly understands the regulatory landscape, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you kind of look at all these people that are in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you just look at them and say, there's no clue, there's no chance that they really understand the ramifications of all this stuff. You don't know who they're hiring behind the scenes, but so hopefully there'll be more tech-savvy people that help make these decisions, and I think perhaps has been true in the past.
Yeah.
And that's just an impression, right? Just from watching.
When I was there last May talking to Congress members, particularly those who are involved with small businesses and the SBA, one thing that they said was that there were 9 listening sessions where they brought in big tech leaders to talk about AI, and they had great attendance. But that still doesn't mean that even if they're sitting in a room, that they really understand what's going on behind the scenes with technology. So how do you think this is going to affect small businesses, entrepreneurs, small to medium-sized businesses? Do you think that having a little bit less regulation will help bring down prices for us? And when you talked earlier about the democratization, will there be more opportunities for people to take courses? And you see all these things online too, of people who have this AI strategy that they've created and they're making a lot of money teaching other people how to do it, right? It's not necessarily that their product is so successful that it works for everybody, but they're great at marketing. And so I also think about that landscape, because I know as a small business, it's really easy to get caught up in what's the new shiny thing, and that person looks successful, so I'm going to pay however much money for their course. Whether you use it in your business or not, it's another story.
Yeah, I mean, I think the macro view is that there's a tremendous amount of investment going on around the world, maybe outside of Europe, but around the world to lead in AI and to make the innovations of the future. The United States has to decide whether they want to compete with that. And it could be argued that we haven't been competing well so far. Just true. Maybe in private business, but just as an overall country, there's a lot more we can do. We can lead the charge. So that's a set of decisions. And I think there's that, again, pendulum of risk, that people are going to have to, sometimes you have to take a risk to lead. At a micro, I think you're right. I think it's going to unleash a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs to go drive these innovations. Less regulations is going to result in more investment, and more investment is going to result in hiring of more people. Could be inside, outside the country, but still hiring of more people that I think is going to bring the innovation along with it. I even think in academia, like I know just from one of the research papers I did back in October, right now, there is a 2.3 times gap in the supply and demand for AI talent in the United States. In other words, the demand is outpacing supply by 2.3.
Yeah.
Very hard to hire people. And then people are leaving the current jobs that they're in to go get new jobs because they're willing to pay even, top dollar, like 20% premium to get people to come in, right? There was a study by, I think it was, trying to remember the name of it. Oh, darn it. I can follow up with you, but they did a study of academia, and it was a 4.4 gap in the amount of people that wanted to go to college to get an AI degree versus the colleges or the university's ability to staff them.
Yeah.
So what that kind of indicates is that, well, that supply and demand gap certainly won't close. It might actually grow in the years ahead because there's not as many new entrants, because even academia has a supply and demand gap because everyone wants to get involved in this, right? So I think if they can come up with prudent policies that aren't overly risky, that just open up the spigot a little bit for innovation, a little bit less regulation, allow more money to flow so that we can win in the world marketplace around this, that could be a good thing. And that may be one of the things that happens here.
Yeah.
Time will tell. And obviously regulation, these bigger, like I came from IBM, I think they can absorb a lot of regulation. I think a lot of smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses struggle more because they don't have the risk tolerance to be able to absorb problems, right? But I think there's a real skill problem going on here. Hopefully there'll be investments in colleges and universities to really ramp up the technical parts of the curriculum, because it used to be not as many people were into STEM, but now I think that has totally changed.
Yeah, there's no way to, even the way that marketers and PR people, that's been my field for a long time. Even the way we look at things, you can't be a siloed person, like working on your little piece of the business. Maybe you're working at advertising, but you have to have it be a fully integrated strategy and campaign, because you need the metrics and you also need the storytelling, and you need to combine them. And the more data you have, the better job you're going to be able to tweak, see, A/B testing for messaging, which one's performing better, who is performing to the right segment of the market. We need all of this data. And I think people are really waking up to the fact that it's a data-driven business. Everything is data-driven. And you have to have an understanding. You don't have to be a computer scientist. You don't have to be an engineer, but you do need to understand that aspect of it, not just from the financial aspect.
Yeah, 3 points in time at different decades. Just my 2 cents on that. So when I first became a marketing executive in the early 2000s, it was all gut feel stuff. Who won the opinion wars on what to do in marketing? It just was. And then let's just say 2012 or, in that time frame, I think you started getting into the digital world, which inherently digital is about data. And so you start to be able to understand click-throughs and ad impressions and stuff like that. So it became a little bit more evidence-based on what you did. Jump to 2022, and a decade later, I do think the best marketers are data scientists, or at least have data scientists on their team so that they can crunch the pipeline, the data, understand the dynamics. The whole world of ad tech, it's all data science.
Yeah.
Go a decade out from here is, if I had a dime for every time over my 20-year marketing career that a business person or an executive said to me or my team, I can read the damn chart, I see the numbers, talk to me about root cause. What is causing this, and what are you going to do about it? And what are the options for us? What are we going to do about it?
Right.
That gets you into what I was saying earlier in our discussion about cause and effect, scenarios, having AI agents that can actually help you problem solve, because you cannot understand. Looking at a whole bunch of data is great, but it doesn't tell you root cause. Today's generative AI cannot tell you root cause. There's a causal mechanism there, which it doesn't understand. And so I think a decade from now, maybe even sooner, but sometime in the future, you're going to want marketers, or at least some of your team, that are going to be able to do a little bit more than crunch numbers as a data scientist, but actually be able to problem solve with it. So you're right. It's changing every discipline. And I know for my 3 kids, my 3 boys, they grew up digital, and, STEM is just part of, the new generation. So yeah, I don't think, from what I've read in my studies, the academia is not keeping up, and I get it, because it used to be that they overinvested in STEM and then they didn't get enough people, but this is across all demographics now. Men, women, doesn't matter, race, it doesn't matter anything anymore. There's a greater percentage of people that want to get into this, technology. And like you said, whether it's a marketing person or you're a finance person or, communications, whatever you're doing for a living, they want more technical background. And So hopefully there's a big focus on that over the next 4 years, that to build that talent pool in the United States, because it's more than loosening up regulations and money and providing, more investment. You need the skills to do it.
Yeah. And that's, I'm getting my MBA right now. I teach grad school, but I'm getting my MBA with specialty in AI and ML because Villanova had one of the few programs that was hybrid or online program that I could do that would teach it from the business perspective, incorporate it into marketing and into what I'm teaching, which is digital marketing, digital media management. But I didn't have to go back and take undergrad courses in computer science. So there are ways to have a bigger understanding of these concepts of AI, of thinking about how it's going to move in the future without necessarily having to go back and learn how to code and do all of that. There are also careers that I've heard the data, like the entrepreneur, right? The person who is the go-between between the C-suite and the data scientists who can help communicate the language between the two to make sure that everything's getting done and everybody understands what's going on. AI ethicists, that's something you can get certified in, and that's going to be a new career field. So it is creating all of these new opportunities for us at the same time.
Yeah, you bring up, maybe you should pack up and head out to Washington. It's actually, just thinking on the fly here, you are right that a degree from a university is not as critical as it used to be. Yes, there's a supply and demand gap, and it's probably where you're going to get the best, especially if you're in a graduate level program. But there are so many AI and just, digital technology oriented courses on Coursera. I mean, they're everywhere. Every business, IBM, Microsoft, Google, Meta, they all offer all this education. And, perhaps one thing they should do with the education budgets is start incenting people to do their own practitioner level skill development and help subsidize that, without getting
amazing.
Yeah, you see all these statistics, which who knows if they're right or wrong, but we tend to spend more money on education in any country in the world and not have the best scores. So returning, that just could be good because you can self-educate yourself out there today. Those courses are really good. They're hands-on. And with the digital technology, you can do labs and all that stuff. And I took one from the Wharton School about a year ago. It was on AI for business strategy. It was really good. But there's technical coding, it's all out there. But some of them you got to pay $1,000 here, $500 there. They're not all free, right? That would be a great program just to get the masses of people to, if you just help subsidize that to some degree, because people will know whether, it's not like you can rip it off because you have to pass the course. And
right.
To pass the course, you still got to answer the questions, even though you're sitting there in your underwear and your home. You still got to do it, right? But yeah, I do think we need to do something about talent. It's just there's not enough people to fill the need. And if we put more investment in this country and we loosen up the regulations, which is likely, and by the way, all these other things like Bitcoin and quantum, and there's a whole bunch of technological things on the horizon here that a lot of other countries are investing in too, the skill set is going to have to be energized under the covers of all that. Otherwise, you're throwing money at nothing.
Yeah. And to your point, the program that I teach was created before we were talking about Gen AI. And so I incorporate like a tool of the week into my live sessions. And I walk students through, like last week, I walked them through Anthropic, Claude's new capability where it can act as you, it can find, this database and merge them and make sure everything is in the right place. I did a closed ChatGPT format that I used with a voice activator, so I could just record voice to talk about brand strategy and pain points, and it would ask me more questions based on what I input to make sure it could capture the data it needed for me to create a plan out of it. So there are all these great things we can do, but they're not necessarily being taught at universities, maybe in the business school, right? But not in the comms. And so we're trying to, as professors, self-educate, go do courses, get further degrees, certifications ourselves. And I'm a part-time professor, so nobody's paying for this but me. But I want to make sure it's a value add for me and for my students and for other business owners so that they understand where they can start, that they don't need to be scared of this, that they really need to start implementing, and that it really can right now save a lot of time in task management. And you can pretty easily set up some AI chatbots and sequences to take care of menial tasks that take up a lot of our time. And then, to your point, in a couple of years, hopefully maybe in 2025, we'll be able to start moving into agentic AI and causal AI, as you mentioned, and be able to really have more freedom to think about complex issues or dream and see what's realistic and what's not, but help move our businesses forward in that way.
Yeah. Generative AI is going to be like the internet. I mean, for someone, I might be the only, probably not, but hopefully not. When I went to college at the good old University of Massachusetts, we didn't have the internet. In fact, we didn't even have PCs when I went, and there certainly wasn't cell phones. I don't even I think back to them, how did you even know there was a party or anything? I mean, it's like, my 3 kids grew up on cell phones and the internet, and there's no Encyclopedia Britannica that I have to go to now. You can just figure anything out. So
we wrote down directions to the party, or we had to go to we had to call a phone number that would tell us where the party was, or so
you've been through the journey and you think about 2022 using generative AI, like this ChatGPT, what you were able to do. And then you looked at 2023 and said, wow, you can do a lot more. Now in 2024, it can actually solve, complex math problems. This is the chain of thought that came out, technology that came out in ChatGPT 4.0, which I think they're just now productizing. But now you can do even more. And we're talking, these are 1-year cycles. So just imagine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, every year it's just speeding up. And, so that's what we were saying earlier, is that ChatGPT is going to become sort of the underlying just capability. And then innovations will be built on top of that, and then on top of that, and on top of that. So who knows where this is all heading, but the potential, it is definitely faster than any other technological transformation that we have been through in the last 30 years that at least I've been paying attention, by far. And it's really, really important to understand that we're in the infancy. Crawl, walk, run, we're probably crawling. And so there's a lot to come, I think.
And you are an analyst. You put out papers, research papers, podcasting. What are the other things that you're doing to help get information out to people? And what's the best way for us to follow you to, obviously I'll put the link for the podcast in the show notes, Next Frontiers of AI. I love listening to AI podcasts myself. And then you have, all these other things that you're doing. So should we follow you on LinkedIn? Go to your company website?
Yeah, go to LinkedIn and follow me. I put out research and stuff all the time, and market briefs and things of that nature. So that would be the best way to kind of follow, because everything we do, we put out there. Go to thecuberesearch.com and you can see there's another 12 or 13 analysts besides me, and we all have our sections out there, what we're publishing. We cover a whole bunch of different areas. And I think most importantly, engage. I love hearing from people. I think I spent the first half of my professional career not listening well enough. The second half of my career, I think I doubled down on listening. And the best thing everyone can do is build a network and engage a network. And you'll be surprised how many people want to engage with you and that want to help and talk about things. And the more you do that, the more you learn, right? It's just, so, it's one thing to go follow me on LinkedIn if you like to keep up, but engage too, right? Comment on things, message me. The same's true with, the Cube Research. I'm definitely focusing on sort of the next frontier of AI. I'm trying to help put out research and do advisories with businesses. I'm working with close to 30 different companies now, helping prepare for what's happening in the next couple of years as things build beyond Gen AI. That's sort of what my scope is, of what I'm trying to focus on, at least right now. So it's a fascinating area. And so that's where I'll, keep putting out more and more research and insights, I guess, learning from my expert ecosystem. So yeah, LinkedIn would be the best thing to do, is follow me there.
Okay. And for the businesses that you work with, are they all enterprise? Do you work with medium-sized businesses? What's the parameter?
I would say out of the 30 or so businesses I'm working with right now, I would say 2/3 of them are what we would call small businesses. A lot of them are startups. Probably all, the 2/3 is probably under 100 employees each. Some of them are as small as 5, 6, 7.
Wow.
Obviously, there's some biggies like AWS and Salesforce and SAP and IBM that, we're working with also. But, since I'm focusing more on what's coming in the future, that's being driven by a lot of these, pioneering companies that tend to be a little bit on the smaller side. outside, of course, the big mega ones like Google and Meta and, OpenAI that have endless amounts of money to spend. Yeah, I think it's of all sizes. And it's what I like about it is not just, research and advice and stuff like that, but we can help these companies get visibility because I think there's between the siliconangle.com, the cube.net, which is digital TV. It's sort of like the ESPN of tech. And then the Cube Research, the three parts of the business. There's 10 million unique visitors to those properties every year, about almost 1 million a month. So it's a great opportunity to get visibility for your smaller business, which, earned media is the way to go, not paying tons amount of money for, like we kind of saw that with the election, right? Is earned media is going to carry the day in the end, not just spending boatloads of money on advertising.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Fantastic. So your biggest piece of advice right now for somebody who's listening would just be to get started, to test out the Gen AI products that are out there on the market, the biggies that we know have invested a lot of time, money, and energy into creating their solutions. So they're probably a little bit further ahead than some of the smaller, AI companies that are out there. Anything else that you want to leave us with?
I would definitely get, like I like Perplexity. I use Perplexity and I use Open, ChatGPT and a little bit of Copilot. One thing I would recommend is not just using them, but don't be conservative with them. Ask them hard questions. I've been blown away on the things I've said. I wonder if it can tell me this. And I go, my goodness, it did. And then I would go to Perplexity and do them in both Perplexity and see if they come up with the same answer or similar answers. Because, you got to be a little worried about it's still immature technology, but it can do a lot. So you should just kind of understand that, and you'll learn as you do more and more and more, like everything else, right? The second thing is take advantage. Now I'm glad we got into that conversation about education. Take advantage of all these free courses that are out there. I mean, a lot of them are free and some of them aren't that expensive, and just kind of learn what's going on and where it's all heading and what you can actually do. We had talked once about, you have all these very specialized domain chat GPTs, like like for law practice that understands case or for marketing or, right. There's tons of those out there. You can go do some searches on and find. And then I think the overriding lesson I've learned is with today technology-driven businesses, you gotta focus on today's results, but you gotta keep an eye on what's coming next because it's too easy to lag.
Yeah.
You lag, and once you kind of fall behind, it gets harder and harder to catch up. Unless you're like a huge, massive business that can shift a lot of money. So it's important to look down the hallway a little bit. Don't worry. Don't say I'm going to worry about this agentic stuff next year, right? It doesn't mean you have to do a lot today, but just start kind of understanding what's possible here and, and where things are kind of heading. And again, for the audience of smaller business and entrepreneurs, a lot of this will be delivered through the application set that you're probably using. But you want to look for application vendors that have that vision.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Scott, I always ask one last question. Do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto, just some words of wisdom that get you through, that keep inspiring you to do what you're doing?
Yeah, well, when I was in business, when I was working in a big organization, I always used to say organizations don't do things, people do. It's all about the people and, right? It's all about and you got to treat them as gold and high expectations, but you got to work with people, right? You can't just sit over an organization and hope it works. I do like the Aristotle, just because of the causal AI stuff, his famous quote about once you prove the cause, you at once prove the effect. And conversely, nothing can exist without a cause. Think about that, right? And does today's AI live to that principle? No. And then on the family side is, to me, I'm probably one of the least traveled IBM executives. I valued family over, endless travel. I could have traveled the world and been everywhere all the time. And I had friends that did that. And always remember why you're working and why you're doing all this. You don't work to live. You live to work. No, the other way around. You got
yeah.
Right. It's like, so I think, because in the end, nothing's more valuable than, my view is your family, right? They come first.
Exactly.
So, and then don't bring your kids when they're really small to Finding Nemo, because when it's time for me to figure out whether I'm going to heaven or hell, I must have killed 10,000 fish in my life, because We had fish tanks. We had 3 large sea aquariums, reef aquariums. I have a koi pond that's huge out there. So I think about all the fish that have died over the years. And then they often go to college, and who's stuck with all the fish? That's a joke.
Yeah, well, I have dogs, so fantastic. Scott, this has been another really engaging conversation. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having more of these with you and seeing what we can do together in the future. And I'll thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story, their journey, some expert advice for you on your business journey and your life journey as well in a few days. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.